Hey everyone, welcome to This Week in History with Mike and Will. I'm Mike.
I'm Will.
We are once again quarantined from each other, this time because I'm sick. So, a lot of good that did last time, quarantining myself.
We should have just hung out anyway. It didn't seem to help.
Whatever. Well, hopefully we'll be back to in the same room next week. But as you know, for this show, we pick a moment in history that happened on this week, sometime in the past, and Will researches it or already knows. I don't know where you get your information. You could make it up for all I know.
Yeah.
I assume you don't, but yeah.
You don't make it up, no.
But Will looks into it and tells me about it, so I can learn, and so can you. And Will can brag about how smart he is. So this week we're discussing the excommunication of Martin Luther, which happened on January 3rd, 1521.
Correct.
And I know three things about Martin Luther. One, Lutheranism. That's the Lutheran Church. Lutheran Church.
Yep.
Two, he nailed stuff to a door.
Yep.
And three, I often confuse his name for Martin Luther King. That's not true. I don't confuse the two. But their names are stunningly. It is weird to have those two names connected to such high-profile people.
Yeah.
So tell me more. Well, that's very little that I know.
That is very little. I've got an hour.
You have 1 hour starting now.
There we go. So Martin Luther was. You were correct. He was the founder, or at least the idea of Lutheranism is based around him. So up until this point in history, there really is only one Christian church. Nowadays, we live in a world where there's Baptists and Lutherans, and then all the different synods of Lutheranism, and there's
Protestant,
Adventists, and Latter-day Saints,
Evangelical,
Mormons, and we're technically Christians. And there's, I think, probably hundreds of divisions of Christianity. Then you also have the Greek Orthodox Church, which is a lot like Catholicism, but also a lot different. And that's the main Christian faith of like Eastern Europe and Russia, and also Greece, unsurprisingly. And then there's the Catholic Church, which is the biggest one.
Sure.
Not in America, though, but globally speaking, Catholic Church is large. In America, combined, all the Protestant faiths are larger. But I think Catholicism is technically the largest singular chunk.
Okay.
Not positive. But anyway, up until this point, because all of Europe is ruled by Catholicism by now, it is illegal to like try to tamper with the church. That's heresy. Wow. I mean, you can technically be a Jew, but you're going to be oppressed horribly, as we see throughout all of history. And if you have questions or concerns about the church, that's not for you to decide. The Pope can make some slight changes, but nobody else can.
It's a good way to keep other religions from starting.
Yes, exactly. There were a few attempts. In the 13th century, there was the Cathar Rebellion, which was actually kind of a more progressive church. They wanted to have like the Bible in English or the native language of whatever country, and up until then, that's not okay.
The Cathar Rebellion?
The Cathar Rebellion, which we'll probably talk about. So rather than go into too much detail about it, they were all murdered, very famously. When they were in a stronghold, there was this castle that resisted, and they surrendered finally during the siege, and the Christian leaders who marched in famously said, "Kill them all, God will sort out his own."
Oh.
And they murdered every single person, man, woman, or child in the castle.
Is that where that phrase comes from?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Yep.
I mean,
so that's
not
the origin
cool
of
for
that.
them,
Is a massacre of Christians by Christians. Good job, guys. And then in the 15th century, there was a man named Jan Hus, who also had concerns about the church. He thought it was corrupt. He didn't think that only priests should be able to read the Bible or tell people about the Bible. And he was branded a heretic. There was a large rebellion in defense of him, and he was eventually captured and burned at the stake. So the Christian church has a very hardline approach to anybody having differences of opinions. And also, we've talked before about how there was corruption seated within the church. Certain kings were trying to sort that out. If anybody's going to be corrupt in their kingdom, it's going to be the king.
That's right.
No, yeah, and that's technically, is that even corruption if you make all the rules
Sure, right.
when you're supposed to be making all the rules? I think that's technically not corruption. It's not nice.
Yeah, not technically corruption.
But I don't think it's technically legally corruption, because like people know you're doing it. You're supposed to be doing it. So Martin Luther was born in on the 10th of November, 1483, in the town of Eisleben, which is in the county of Mansfeld in the Holy Roman Empire. So he's what we would call a German.
Okay.
Region of Germany nowadays. And his father was kind of this ambitious middle-class guy. He started out as owning like a business where he owned the deeds for some copper mines and some other things. He wanted to rise, and he thought that the best thing to do is to rise up was also to have his children rise up after him and kind of climb up. He wasn't a noble or anything like that, but this was a time in Germany where you could have upward mobility if you were motivated, if you were educated. So one of the things that his father does is he invests in his son getting an education. Martin is his eldest boy, so he sends him off to school to study. And he says, you're going to study the law because that's really important. And it's a great way to make an income. And then also, you know, your rights and the rights of others.
Good occupation.
It's a good occupation, as long as you're not, you know, a bastard.
Even then, it's a good occupation.
Even then, it's a good occupation. Yeah, actually, probably more profitable if you're a bit of a bastard. So Martin goes off to study, and he, like most law students nowadays, lasts about a month and then says, I don't like it. So he decides he doesn't want to do it because he feels that the law is uncertain. That's his belief. The law is uncertain. So what he really wants to get into to solve his uncertainty is philosophy, which to me,
more uncertain. Yeah,
it seems like that one's the one that actually is more uncertain because we're constantly debating existential truths, whereas the law is, this is the law. That's pretty certain. And he's also fascinated by the study of theology because he's an extremely religious person, almost obnoxiously so at this point. He's starting to, everything in his life is devoted to God. Like that's what he said. And his father is getting tired of this because he's like, you already changed what I sent you to school for. I don't want you to be a priest. This is not the time of profitable priests and rising up through the you know, ecclesiastic means. This is get a job, go out and make something of yourself, and you know, inherit my businesses and then grow upon that. That's what we want from you. Well, Martin kind of throws this all away and decides, nope, you know what? I'm going to be a priest. And his father blows a gasket.
Yeah.
The story goes that Martin was returning home from his studies at college abroad. Not like abroad, but everywhere is abroad when you're in Germany and you have to ride a horse 100 miles.
Okay. A ways away.
It's a ways away. It may as well, you know, it takes a lot of time to get home.
Sure.
And on the way there, lightning strikes nearby, like just off the road from him. It freaks him out, understandably, because that's really, really close. And he makes a prayer and to I believe Saint Anne, and he's like, if you get me through this, I will devote my life to faith, basically. Well, he takes that as a sacred oath, not just I was terrified, so I said something randomly. He takes it very much to heart. He said, well, I will give my life to the church if I get out of here. And he got out of there, and he went home and he said, well, Dad, I know you wanted me to be a lawyer or maybe even a philosopher, but I'm going to be a priest. And his dad almost disowns him. Like, it's after that, his father's not mentioned much throughout history. Like,
oh no.
Kind of except when Luther's later critics tried to disparage him. They're like, well, your father was a miser and your mother was a whore. Literally tried to say his mother was a prostitute,
Wow.
which is not accurate. From the understanding that I've gotten out of it, was she was just like lower middle class woman who was like a hard worker and raised her family. She may have been a washerwoman or something like that, but she wasn't a prostitute. We can look at like his dad too, because his dad's not going to marry a prostitute if he's trying to climb up socially.
But it's an easy accusation to make without
super easy.
You don't need much proof at all.
Right.
I want to back up to the lightning strike, because are you familiar with the statue near St. Norbert right near my?
No.
It's I should know better because I went to that school. There's it's a big statue of a horse rearing back and a guy falling off the horse. And that is apparently a similar thing happened. The guy was riding his horse and the lightning struck, scared the horse, threw him off, and he hit his head or something. And then that was his inspiration to start some sect or become, that was
the creation of the Norbertines.
Yeah, I'm not 90% sure it's a Norbertine. I should check the statue, but it's the St. Norbert College is a Norbertine based thing, and that was I forget the statue is called now too. It's called like I think it's called the conversion or the conversation, one of the two. What a conversation if that's the way you started. But that's not related, right? That's just a different.
No, it's not. It's not. I don't think.
So either way, this is
the Norbertines are very, very, very Catholic, and Martin Luther is not.
Both cases, though, are God talking in very Old Testament sort of ways.
Yeah. Yep. Throwing lightning at the and there's a lot of cases throughout all of religions where it's like lightning, that's God.
Without further scientific evidence, it's pretty good proof of something.
Something's trying to murder you or give you a message. Take something from that. But yeah, nowadays it's a lot less romantic when you're like, well, really, it's just like sky friction, and just kind of rubbing, and then it's boring. Much cooler if you think dude up in the clouds throwing lightning bolts at you because he's trying to get your attention. That's much more.
And all the physics is all nice and good until you get hit by lightning. That's all another story. That might change your mind about things.
Yep, or it gets even if it just gets really close, your hair's standing on end, and you're like,
yep. Or it smites one of your enemies.
Yep.
Right.
There's also another story about he felt really sad at the time because two of his friends died. So one of his friends wrote that one of the reasons he went into the priesthood was he was kind of in mourning. And felt bad about the loss of his friends, so he wanted to devote time to God, to also pursue the question of what is faith and how do I grow as a Christian and understand my faith more and the will of God if I lost my friends, which is I think a pretty rational approach to these kinds of things, especially at that time when life was often short and brutal. Still, like we're still working through some stuff. And so Martin goes off and joins the church at St. Augustine, which is in Erfurt, which is a difficult word to pronounce.
Pardon me, what?
Erfurt, E-R-F-U-R-T, Erfurt. I don't speak enough German to know exactly how that's pronounced. I think it's Erfurt. Sounds like Swedish chef. Erfurt. Erfurt.
Excuse me, Erfurted. Excuse me.
And he does this in July of 1505. So he's 22. He's pretty young. But rather than pursue, he was in school until he started school in when he was 13 or 14. His father was like, go to school. So after all those years, he's like, nope, I'm not. It's like he's really close to finishing his education. He's like, no, I'm changing everything. So his father is kind of understandably upset by this and doesn't get it. So Martin throws himself into the church completely. He's studying his faith, and the monks at St. Augustine's are big on fasting and self-reflection and constant confession. It's kind of this stoic, austere, I guess you'd call it, where It's not a fun one. These aren't the, the drunk friars. They're not even like the Norbertines who have a vow of community. It's very, you're focusing on yourself and your own spiritual growth a lot of the time. Well, he gets really despondent during this and just hates it. And it's the furthest he's ever felt from God, because he just feels like he's just wailing on himself. He feels like God is his jailer, not his savior. And he's miserable by this, which paints a lovely picture of this church. It just, and at that time, a lot of people who were put in as lower priests or acolytes or priests in training, they were treated like slaves. Like you did everything you were told to do, and you didn't have any agency, and you couldn't leave, and you couldn't go anywhere. And it was a lot like slavery at in Europe, not chattel slavery like here, which is again very, very different. Yeah. But it was, you are in bondage, basically. You're a prisoner.
Huh.
Now, for some people, they like that.
Does that method work for getting new priests to be priests?
I mean, the church did really, really well. So, I mean, you had your meals a day. You had a roof over your head. It was largely safe. You had potential to grow and go beyond that. But it was also largely punishment for unruly children would be sent to join a convent or become a monk or a priest, and that'll teach you respect for your elders and God. But those places used corporal punishment, which for those of you who don't know, beating people with like sticks. You'd have to prostrate yourself on the ground in front of the cross for like a day sometimes, which is a stone floor. So you're on your stomach with your arms out like this for 24 hours, no food, no water. It can be really harsh.
I don't know what Martin Luther was thinking at the time, but I imagine it would be something like, there's got to be a better way to get in touch with God.
Yes.
Than what we're doing.
This paints a pretty good picture of like, well, this is stupid and I don't like how this church works. So eventually he branches out from this church, where it's not so much that he's a prisoner here, but he wants to grow. So he gets into church education and he wants to learn more. So he goes to the University of Wittenberg and he starts studying theology full time. And eventually he gets his doctorate of theology in 1512. So 7 years after he becomes a priest, he gets a doctorate. And he's very focused on scripture, and that gets him through his time at St. Augustine. That's what he focuses on, is just studying the Bible, because now he can freely without any concern.
Yeah.
And really trying to understand his faith without other priests telling him what to do. That's when he starts to get ideas.
Oh, which is not great in churches, I understand.
It's not really. It's not in any big institution, right? Like, if these are the way things are, the people in power want to keep it that way. The people are comfortable with it.
Enough with the questions.
Yes, no question. Don't change. Stop. So he's got a few beefs with how the church is running at this point. The church is big on indulgences.
Oh, yeah.
When you go into church and say, I have sinned, I want my record clean, and the priest says, that'll be $20.
Yeah. So when I've heard about that, that struck me as the weirdest part of anyway, I don't know if it was specifically to Christian religion, but any religion, that aspect.
To my knowledge, the Catholic Church is the only one that did indulgences.
Do we know who started that?
I am going to look right now.
Probably some pope, but at some point I'm sure they justified it with like, well, you are paying, you have to suffer a little bit for this, but then it goes to the church, and the church has like these giant cathedrals and things. Like,
Let's see.
I'm sure they could justify it in their minds. Like, yes, we did build these giant churches to glorify God more. It also happens to be a nice place to live.
Well,
look at my robes.
Guess who started this one? It's not the worst pope that you hate.
Oh,
was that Alexander that was just awful?
Yeah,
in the 1500s? Because he's not pope yet.
But another pope?
Pope Urban II, the same guy who started the Crusades.
Hey, yeah. Perfect.
The first known use of the plenary indulgence was in 1095, when he remitted all penance of persons who participated in the Crusades and confessed their sins. So that was through deed.
Pope
It
Urban.
wasn't necessarily through coin.
Oh, okay.
Yep, but that's the guy who started the idea of you can do a thing to earn your
How do you spell his name?
Urban.
Yeah.
Just like the city said, UBARN. Yeah. So
All right.
good old Pope Urban, the guy who starts all this stuff, and then that just kind of developed from there.
Right. Well, obviously, if you're a religious higher up, that probably did seem like a pretty good plan. Like, oh, I'm tired of listening to these people. You know what? Tell you what, I'll listen to you, and I'll absolve you of things, but that's going to cost you a little bit of.
And I'm not sure if it started with like local priests who started taking cash for it,
Right.
but the idea of, okay, you can do a thing and that'll wipe the slate clean.
Yeah.
As opposed to like living with good acts and accruing, kind of like accruing goodwill with God, which is kind of the general Catholic faith is, you go out, you do good works, and at the end, the scales are balanced of were you a good person, were you a bad person, kind of a thing. And
Right.
you try to do more good than bad.
Yeah, which that seems like a sound.
Really, that just seems like a sound lifestyle. Like,
yeah,
try to do more good than bad, regardless of afterlife benefit.
Yeah.
Just in general. And it kind of falls nicely in line with my philosophy, don't be a dick. Like,
for sure.
Unless somebody else is being awful, then there's certain times where it's okay.
I believe mine is try your best to not be a dick.
Try your best to not be a dick. Right. That's right. And well, I always say, don't be a dick, but there's also the paradox of tolerance. You can't tolerate intolerant, awful behavior because that allows it to grow and make life worse for other people, which makes you kind of by extension a dick.
Right.
You're like, not my problem. Kind of being a dick. So anyway, these indulgences have gotten crazy. The Pope is the single wealthiest person in Europe at this time, roughly. Like, there's not a lot of people that can really compete with how much money he has. And he has decided that he wants to build a brand new basilica. So St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican, which is like white marble and gold, the whole thing. It's a gorgeous structure, but he wants all of this money, and he's getting it through donations from poor people largely. This is a church that is the house of God, and it's going to be splendid.
You're gonna love it. Can we visit?
Love it. And it's this ostentatious thing, and this sticks in Martin Luther's craw, especially like in the Holy Roman Empire. They're not big on that. Their nobles were like the types who lived in kind of rustic manners, and they're hunters, and they're drinking beer and eating meat, and they're not all about the fancy trappings of the more southern courts, or like the French courts, or even the English courts. We're hardy German folk, and this is how we do stuff, and we don't need all that fancy stuff to do it. You can see it a lot around, even being in Wisconsin, we have a lot of German people, so you can see the way the German churches are compared to how an Italian church looks. It's a completely different approach. It's more pragmatic, more reserved.
We're not those fancy Italians.
Yeah, so Martin Luther really, really doesn't like this, that this money is being taken and sent to the church basically to what he thinks is build the Pope a nicer house.
Yep.
Especially when the Pope has all this money, why doesn't he build his own house? Luther's famous for saying that here's a man who's wealthier than Crassus, and who was the famous Roman, who was part of the triumvirate with Caesar and Pompey, and he was Roman history.
Yeah.
And he says, so he's richer than that guy ever was, and he's not buying his own stupid house. and he's taking money from the poor.
Yeah.
He should take his own money and build his stupid house, and then any alms or gathered wealth through the churches goes back into taking care of people.
Sure.
I don't like this. This is stupid. So he has a huge problem with the indulgence thing. That's his big crux. And then also the language barrier with Catholicism. Mass is only in Latin at this point. Nobody without a proper education speaks Latin, and the cost of a proper education is extremely prohibitive. It's like today, except you can't get a loan. There's no student loans. So it'd be like, here's the cost of going to school. If you want to go to school, you have to pay this out of pocket. It's not cheap.
Hope you're rich.
Actually, probably even more expensive. But you know, these institutions are largely built for nobles by nobles.
Right.
So
to maintain their class, I assume.
Right. And also at this point, most books are all handwritten. Mm-hmm. So there's a huge expense in education. So that's why it costs so much. It's just like, this just really does cost a lot of money to get a big building made, to fit all these people here, to feed all of you. It's a much more difficult process than nowadays.
I mean, yeah, we are trying to rip you off, but it is pricey too. So
right.
Okay.
Right. Like, we want to make some money, but also, like, the people running the schools, if they make their patrons mad, they're nobles with armies and soldiers and stuff. They'll just burn it down if they want to.
Yeah.
So they're really trying to, like, properly educate people and make the money worth it. Largely, there are, of course, corrupt any institution. There's a corrupt version of it somewhere. So Luther's sick of the indulgences. He doesn't like the limitation caused by the Latin masses. He doesn't like that only priests are allowed to talk about the scriptures, which are the sacred texts of Jesus. He doesn't like that. So he starts coming up with complaints about this, and he writes them down. And it's very famous that he nailed it to a church door.
Yeah.
But what I've read is he sent it basically as a book. Well, not a book, because it's 95 theses, which are 95, like, basically the titles to essays citing his arguments. Some of them are more fleshed out, some of them are more just like one sentence. And he sends this to the Pope, and it's basically like, here's my issues, guy. Like, this is what I have a problem with. Other people saw this and were like, because Martin did not shut up. He did not, like, this was not his quietly writing this in his study. He's talking about this to everybody he knows. He's a professor at a college, so he actually has a right to talk about these things. In certain situations, you don't have the right to do that, but it's his job to debate stuff, and it is within his purview to bring up these questions because it's based around his profession, and he's been given kind of a dispensation to be able to do that. A normal person can't, but a doctor of theology. So it's almost like he planned this. He probably said, well, I'd like to be able to raise questions. This is my happen.
Yeah. So he didn't actually nail him to the door? Or is that
might just be a story.
Really?
Yes. I believe they were nailed to the door, but it's not sure if he's the guy who nailed them to the door.
Oh.
But he wrote it. He wrote every single thing of it, and he gave big speeches on it. So the Pope gets these, and some of the things are listed. They're very reasonable, questions about indulgences. They also directly attack the Pope a lot.
I'm sure that goes over well.
And that goes over about as well as a fart in a convent. He's not happy with this at all. So the Pope's like, this is not, you cannot. No. Who is this guy? You're just some priest. You can't tell me what to do. I'm the Pope. I've been here for, like, my job has been here for forever. I'm important.
And Martin Luther has no standing. He's just he's a teacher.
The professor. That's it.
He's not
a teacher at one college in Germany. He's not the chief teacher of all colleges. He's not a bishop. He's not.
Yeah, he also has no, like, religious standing. He's not bishop or cardinal or anything. He's just
he's a priest because he's a priest, but he's not. Yeah, he's got no power.
Okay.
So here's this dude just kind of
He has the
shouting
power
about
of the words.
Yes. Well, people start to listen to this.
Yeah,
And this
power of words.
strikes a chord with, like, again, with a lot of like the Germanic thinking of, yeah, we 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 shouldn't have to pay for church stuff.
Yeah.
This is dumb. Like, and yeah, it would be nice to have mass in German.
I would like to know what they're
I'd
saying.
like to know what they're saying instead of going, yep, got it. I feel great, guys. And yeah, it would be nice. And then all there's a faction of nobles who are like, oh, this is great. Not having to pay the church, having control over all my own lands, pretty sweet deal. I mean, yes, for our immortal souls and,
Yes.
and stuff. Totally not based on politicky things.
Sure.
Anyway, so it's got kind of like a local, like especially in Saxony, which is more rural, more rugged chunk of Germany. The people are like, yeah, I dig this, and they're the head of that region. The elector is what that's called. Is like it's kind of split up into counties, like big chunks of land. And Saxony is headed by the elector Frederick III, and he likes Luther. He's like, oh yeah, I like what you're selling. This is a good idea. Well, so Pope Leo's trying to figure out how to handle this, and he sends a couple of priests to talk to Luther and basically talk him down. Like, look, I don't appreciate you going around telling everybody what you think it should be and criticizing me openly and attacking like the foundations of the church. If you have concerns, there are ways we are happy to talk about it, but this is not, you're being very belligerent.
Yes.
Well,
check out the complaint box on your way out the door.
Exactly. And Luther doubles down then. That just makes him more stubborn. He's just like, you don't tell me, I tell you. And because he believes that as a creature of conscience, which is God-given, that he is allowed to say how he feels and to speak this, and unless the scripture tells otherwise, no priest can tell him what to do. And he points to the Bible. Like, if you find it, I'll change my ways, but I'm not finding it anywhere in there. And they're like, well, the Bible isn't the only authority on how the church works. He's like, I disagree. Mm-hmm. That's his root thing. Is if it's not in the Bible, it's not a rule.
Pretty sure we had that discussion when we wrote the Bible, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, and yeah, that was kind of what the Council of Nicaea was all about. Was this goes in there, that doesn't go in there. This.
Yeah.
So he's like got his views, and the Pope's got his views, and then the people are kind of sitting there watching this all unfold. So the Pope sends another emissary, and this guy tries to be more conciliatory, but by now he brings a book from the Pope basically addressing the 95 Theses. And it comes with a written warning saying, watch your step, buddy, because I'm the Pope and I can put a ban on you. I can put different edicts against you, and I can excommunicate you. And you don't want that to happen.
So the guy was more conciliatory, but also with a threat.
Right. So yeah, the priest himself was more like, well, why don't we try this way? And the Pope was like, give him this too while you're there. And this is Pope Leo X. So, this is on 15 June 1520. So Luther's been a priest, a doctor of theology for 8 years at this point, and he's become more set in his ways now, and he's gotten even bigger, loftier ideas, and he's starting to attract bigger crowds of people to his classes, and then he starts doing public sermons about this. And the Pope issues this edict along with all the priests that he's been sending to talk Luther down, saying, if you don't, you will be excommunicated. This is your final warning.
Sorry, as a priest, is Martin Luther doing like weekly services too? Is he?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so he still has his services too. So he's doing sermons in German, which is the people would love it. The
Sure.
other priests are kind of, and other priests are also in the area appreciating this. They like this because they speak better German than they speak Latin. So they're like,
Ultimately, I mean, that's ultimately probably the better method anyway. Just do it. Just
yeah, just speak in
because
the local language.
yeah,
Don't try to force speak. And we've seen this, nowadays. It's like, just speak the local language. Don't go in and be like, I'm going to speak this language, and you guys are going to deal with it. It's like
yeah,
being a bad tourist, you know.
right.
um, it's just easier to communicate the idea when you're communicating in the language somebody else knows.
Yeah.
Um, if you're listening, you want to hear it in your language. If you're talking, you want the person to understand you. It just works with communication.
Sure. Yeah.
So Luther takes this book as a big public meeting and sets it on fire
Oh,
in the center of town, and then writes a book about it saying, "Why did I burn the Pope's book?"
see,
That is the last straw. There's no negotiation after this.
unless he actually nailed the things to the wall, which may or may not have happened. It sounds like if anything, it might have been a metaphor. So like, yeah, metaphorically nailed these to the
Right,
wall.
nails it to the wall. Yep, very publicly.
Either way, burning the book seems like a more noteworthy act.
That's what I would think.
Yeah.
That was what I would think too, is because he does this very publicly. He does it in like the town square in front of everybody while railing against the Pope.
And then it admits to it and writes
and then sets it on fire and burns it to ash and then writes a book about it and a letter and then sends it to the Pope. And he has it like passed out as a pamphlet. He's got friends who are printers, so they're passing on all this information. And the Pope just has it. He's had enough.
Yeah.
You know what? I warned you. You didn't listen to me. And then you burned my stuff in front of everybody.
Ooh, yeah, that's gotta hurt the ego, if nothing else.
If nothing else. But also, this could inspire revolution. This could inspire violence, because he's talking against not just the church, he's talking against the Catholics who act like this church is okay. And his rhetoric starts to get a little more heated. So the Pope, having been a student of history, knows that this can cause problems. Every time that some rabble rouser comes out and starts shouting about anything, bad things tend to happen. But also, this is an attack on me, this is an attack on my power, this is an attack on Mother Church. No matter whether it was his own personal ego or his defense of his faith, Leo's had enough and excommunicates Luther on the spot and just that this is done. And on top of that, he writes to the emperor and says, this man is a heretic. He's not just excommunicated, he's a heretic. He's in direct violation of the church. He's a threat to the church. He's a threat, therefore, to his fellow man. And as a Christian, you, as his Lord, need to hold him accountable.
Which is like death, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So there is, they have this Council of Worms, not little Wrigley guys. It's a town, Worms.
Oh, okay.
An unfortunately named town. And they have this council where Luther is he's brought to this council and they demand that he defend his actions. And Luther does. And then this is, again, he stands up and says, well, if you can't find where it says in the Bible that I can't say this and I can't do this, I'm going to say it and I'm going to do it. And you can't stop me, neener, neener, neener. He does it in a very eloquent way.
Sure.
If I can find the quote, again, didn't break that all down. Unless I'm convinced by the testimony of the scriptures or by clear reason, for I do not trust either in the Pope or in councils alone, since it is well known that they've often erred and contradicted themselves. I'm bound by the scriptures I've quoted, and my conscience is captive to the word of God. I cannot and will not recant anything, since it's neither safe nor right to go against conscience. May God help me, amen. Well, that has a divisive effect on people. And he has this rival named Johann Eck, who does not like Luther. He completely disagrees with him on everything, and they have frequent debates about this, either through written letters or he reads what Luther writes. So then Eck goes and writes his own thing. and he's kind of put up as the opposition in this trial.
Okay. What was his name? Johann?
Johann Eck, E-C-K. He's an assistant to an archbishop, and he basically is like the lawyer. He's the prosecuting attorney. It's kind of his job in this.
Okay.
To lay out the argument against Luther and say, you violated church rules. You did this. You were warned. You continuously went against the church. Then you were burning stuff from the Pope and basically doing things that if you'd done in person, you'd been killed on the spot. What's your defense? And Luther says, well, scriptures say I can. And then Eck kind of responds with, that's literally every heretic's defense, though, is I'm just following my conscience. Like murderers just follow their conscience and kill people. You're ripping this apart. He brings up Arius, the priest who had the big beef at the Council of Nicaea, who said Jesus isn't as divine as God because he's only half God and half man, and it caused a rift. He brings up all sorts of famous schisms or almost schisms that damaged the church, and he's like, you're doing the same things they did, and that's not acceptable. The Council of Worms issues the Edict of Worms after this that finds Luther guilty, which means he's an outlaw. Now, an outlaw in Germany.
Sorry, so was Luther just there by himself, defending himself and everything?
Yeah, pretty much.
There was a bunch
He
of
had some nobles that were like, kind of like, yeah, I kind of agree, but nobody went all in with this guy, right?
Okay. So it was the whole council and the and Johann Eck, the whole group, and just him.
Yep.
And they found him guilty. Well, surprise, surprise.
Surprise, right? It's the equivalent of a tribunal. It's basically if he's already guilty in their minds. He is given the opportunity to recant and say, I don't believe this anymore. And that is the only way they'll not punish him further. And they could maybe even rescind his excommunication.
Why would you even go? Why would you go?
Because that's Luther's attitude. He's like, well, I'm going to just talk about it. And if I die for my faith, that's fine.
Yes, all right.
That's fine.
I guess
and you think this too.
You get so far in, you might as well keep going.
As well, in for a penny, in for a pound.
Yep.
I should. And he also believes very seriously that if he can present his case, maybe they'll listen.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
How'd that go?
They find him guilty. Yep. Because the line's laid out. Unless you do this, this is what's going to happen. Well, he doesn't recant. He refuses. It doesn't matter how good his speech is. He refuses.
Yep.
So the emperor issues this Edict of Worms that says he is an outlaw. An outlaw means no German is allowed to offer him shelter, or they're considered just as bad as him. Oh. That there is absolutely no penalty for doing him harm of any kind. And that people are encouraged to do so. This is a blank check on murder for this one guy. Like, anybody can murder and they won't be penalized. That's what being an outlaw is. You are out of all laws. Like, you're not.
Isn't that the plot of Death Race 2000?
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
Right.
Like, you guys are all filth and scum, so you can do whatever you want to each other. Go for it.
Yeah, okay.
At least in the remake. In the original, they like ran over old people and stuff.
Yeah, I don't remember either of them.
It wasn't good. The original wasn't good.
Okay.
I don't think. But the new one is, well, you're dead men anyway, basically. You don't count, so let's make some money off of you. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so Luther he's declared an outlaw. It's amazing that he makes it out of town, because if somebody sells, I mean, in the modern day, especially, it would be crazy with social media. But back then, if somebody says, well, yeah, anybody could kill him, there's got to be that sociopath in town who's like, I get to kill? I could kill this guy and I get no penalty.
It's Christmas.
Or that some particularly devout lord didn't get right up at the table and cut his head off.
Yeah.
He got out. He was put under kind of a house arrest.
That had to have been an awkward leaving of the room anyway. Well,
yeah. So we're going to kill him. I'm gonna go.
Best,
So he's put under kind of this house arrest, and this what's called a papal nuncio is kind of like the hand of the church. He's been given like a nuncio.
say again?
Nuncio is a nuncio. Um,
I don't speak Italian or Latin, so
I don't either. I don't either. I have to look these words up.
thank God we have Martin Luther. Yeah.
Yes. This is a guy who's given like a specific job by the Pope to go do something. He can kind of go wherever he wants and do whatever he needs to do. He's got papal authority to do this specific task. And his job is to apprehend Luther. And he finds Luther and he doesn't. He's like, he's not going anywhere.
Oh, the classic villain mistake.
Yes. And Luther very much does go anywhere. He leaves. And while he's riding away, he gets ambushed by highwaymen, by robbers.
Sure.
And they capture him and bring him to a castle in Saxony and treat him to a life of comfort. And it's revealed that Frederick III, the Elector of Saxony, had him captured to protect him. He's like, no, I like this guy. I don't want him to die.
From out of nowhere, Frederick III comes in.
So yeah, just another German Fred doing something cool.
You know, it's important to make good friends.
It is. It is. And yeah, this guy, he's like, I like the cut of your jib. I like that you yell at people and
yeah.
he swears. No, I don't think he swears, but he, you burn books. That's a German thing. Leave the jokes to you. Sorry.
Yeah,
he's got good, upstanding German values. He yells at people. He tells everybody like it is, and then he burns books.
Yeah, great. I'm thinking that's not the reason, but okay.
That's not. I don't think so. But he probably sees this as this guy's sticking it to the Pope, and the Pope's been sticking it to us for years. So
sure,
turnabout's fair play. I appreciate this guy.
Yeah. For
whatever reason, Frederick has him kidnapped. So everyone's like, "Oh, we don't know where Luther is," and Frederick's like, "Yeah, I have no idea."
Oh, jeez.
You're ashamed if he was in
kidnapped. You say, "Ooh,
ooh." So yeah, he fake kidnaps him, which I think is brilliant because it's not like he rides out with soldiers and he's like, "No, this guy's under my protection," because that would bring all the other electors down on it, and the emperor would put him under a ban. Instead, he's like, "Kidnapping, yes, haha, it's a ruse." And the emperor is kind of lax in pursuing this because unlike other like monarchies that are more absolute, where if the king says this is what we're doing, the lords typically fall in line. The Germans argue, like they have it's a very, very complex system where they basically have this sense of German freedom, which is not for the people, they don't matter. But the nobles have a sense where I can kind of do what I want as long as I pay my taxes. And the emperor has always been like, yeah, this is how this works. And this has worked this way for hundreds of years. The emperor is kind of, he's in charge because he's in charge by permission. It's like a dozen really wealthy, powerful guys say, yes, that's fine. And then all the lesser nobles. But he's more powerful than any of them individually, but if they all rose up against him, the emperor wouldn't really be able to do anything about it.
Right.
And this causes problems later on when we have the 30 Years' War and the Treaty of Westphalia and all that stuff was kind of a culmination of how this starts to go. So the emperor is like, well, he's not dead, but he's outlawed. So eventually, if he turns up, we'll just cut his head off. It's fine.
Yeah.
But he doesn't turn up.
Probably not worth it for the emperor to do it anymore.
Right, and he's got to comb a massive chunk of land. I mean, this is Austria, Germany, parts of France, the lowland countries. Like, it's a huge amount of land. There's lots of forest, and if he tries to comb it, it's like.
But also, if Martin Luther is now, I mean, he's exiled.
It's somebody else will take care of the problem.
Yeah. And he can't spread his poison anymore anyway.
Yeah, and the emperor is very much, he's also pragmatic German rulership mentality of the time was, well, I have so much other stuff I have to be doing. I have to manage trade. I have to manage the military. There's always the Turks to worry about. There's this craziness in Transylvania between the Ottomans and the locals. There's Hungary to worry about. There's Russia. There's the Swedes are doing things. There's Poland. I'm in the middle of Europe. And
Got a lot on my plate.
All of this, okay, is a lot. Plus, I'm German, and I have to deal with other Germans being mad at me and try to corral these people to get to do a certain thing. So he's kind of in this spot where he's like, I'm doing what the Pope says, but I can't send out my soldiers to go hunt this guy down. I don't have resources like that. It would take like 1 million men to comb the whole country to find this guy. So I'm not going to do that. But he trusts in his vassals, which is a bad idea because he shouldn't. Because one of them is hiding Martin Luther. So Luther sees this as his chance to really dig into his beliefs and write.
Oh.
And he writes a lot. He sees this as his moment of, there's a book in the Bible, Revelations, which was written by a man who was apparently trapped on an island in Greece. And he sees this as his moment like this, where he's having this revelatory moment of really writing out his views and his ideas and kind of crafting a new religion, or the perfection of Christianity is how he sees it. And because he's actually not, hiding under a rock somewhere, he can hand out his letters and his pamphlets, and they start to spread around throughout Germany. And the Pope's getting really frustrated because he just can't seem to catch this guy.
And I thought someone would kill him for me by now.
Right. So it doesn't it causes this massive rift where Luther, there's people that are kind of backing Luther, and there's people that are backing the church, and then there's everybody else that's kind of watching. So he's at this castle, Wartburg Castle is what it's called. It's a lovely estate, but fortified, so he's protected. And his conversations have stirred up other people that are a little more radical than him. There are the Zwickau prophets, is what they're called, and they show up in Wittenberg, which is where he was teaching. And that's also where he studied. So it's kind of a nice circular thing for him. And these guys come in and they start talking about how they should have, this is a crazy idea, the equality of man. All people are equal. And baptisms for adults.
What for adults?
Baptism. That's not a thing. So baptism is the customary act of basically dunking a child underwater and saying you're a Christian.
Yeah.
There's more to it than that. But at this point, adults don't do that. You can convert, but you're technically like kind of still an outsider. It's complex and weird. But these guys are talking about that. And then they also are talking about how Jesus is going to come back. And it's imminent. Imminent, darn it. So we're equal, but then maybe kind of an apocalypse. And it's kind of stirring up.
Who are these guys? The prophets of what?
Zwickau. Zwickau.
CK?
Zwickau prophets. That's how I'm pronouncing it. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong.
Yeah, Zwickau prophets sounds like a German rap band.
I like it. So because these guys are stirring people up, and nobody likes to hear people talk about equality, that always makes people in power.
Makes people so upset.
It always makes people mad. They beg Luther to come back to Wittenberg to basically talk him down. And Luther doesn't agree with these people, like at all.
Yeah.
He's not a fan of the concept of all people are equal. He does not believe that. So he writes the elector and says his flock has been infiltrated by Satan, and he's got to go back and fix it. So he goes back and fixes it. And he also doesn't like that they are happy to use violence if necessary. He's opposed to that against Christians sometimes. So he goes in and he has a bunch of sermons about this, and the people kind of calm down again. And Luther establishes a sanctuary for himself at Wittenberg, where he's allowed to kind of teach. And he goes through several battles, moral battles with the church. And he kind of has to get shuffled around from elector to elector for a bit, where he's in hiding. But Wittenberg always seems to be the place he goes back to. One of the things that Luther's big on, though, is talking about how he doesn't like the term Lutherans for people who follow him. He says you're either a Christian or you can call yourself an evangelical, but those are the terms you should use for Christians, not a Lutheran. I'm not a god, I'm not a prophet. I'm just
deify himself, yeah.
This is what my ideas are. So, I mean, he has a huge career after this still, though, where he's trying to forge a church, and he accrues followers everywhere. The peasant class really likes it because they can finally listen to the mass and understand everything. But contrary to like popular belief, he's not a pacifist. Like he says he is, but people are he knows that this is going to cause a rift that is going to be solved through violent action. Because that's just the history of the church. That's the history of religion. Yeah. Whenever there's a big rift, violence happens. So as much as he tries to say, oh, I'm a pacifist, I don't want this to happen. It does.
Well, is he like he's personally a pacifist, but he realizes that other people.
Yes, right, exactly. Like he's not going to get involved.
There's a middle gray area where like no one should fight. I mean, people are going to fight.
And he does try to say, hey guys, don't be violent on my behalf. Don't come and murder people for me. I don't want that. So he does a good job of that. One of the big projects that he got into when he was first exiled was he began translating the Bible front to back.
Okay.
So that becomes a huge part of his personal work, is just translating the Bible. He gives sermons and he converts and he writes out the Bible. He also gets married, which is weird because he's a priest. Excuse me. But there's actually an interesting story where he helped a bunch of nuns escape from a Cistercian convent. They're like trapped there, like kind of like you guys are nuns, deal with it. And they didn't want to be nuns, but he helped them get away. So one of them, in gratitude, married him, and then they started a family. They had children. So he very much is like, yeah, priests should be able to get married. And another big push of his is there should not be a medium between me and God. I can talk to God. Anyone can talk to God. I don't need a priest to talk to God for me. So that's a huge thing that he starts pushing and that his followers start to really, really believe in. As he goes on, like I said, we could go into all the details of his Reformation process. But since we only have a little bit of time left to talk about the impact of this, though, is at the end of his career, one of the things that he's very keen on is blaming the Jews and treating them like he's very anti-Semitic, which is unfortunate.
Why is it always the Jews?
It's always the Jews because they killed Jesus. Yep. So here's a couple. His works on the Jews. He had a 60,000 word treatise on the Jews and their lives, and on the holy name and the lineage of Christ. He argues that the Jews are no longer the chosen people, but the devil's people, and refers to them with violent language. He cites Deuteronomy, wherein Moses commands the killing of idolaters and burning of their cities and properties as an offering to God. He calls for sharp mercy against the Jews. So he preaches, he goes from, oh, I'm a pacifist, to preaching extreme violence against the Jews. Like they should all be either forced to convert or killed, period.
Wow.
Right. And so he's given this, I feel like this is an important thing to talk about too, because he's given such he was a man of peace. He was not a man of peace. He very much supported the murder and genocide of Jews. And then he also had views on Islam. but they weren't as harsh. Like, he didn't think that all of these resources should be devoted to fighting the Turks. He thought that that was kind of a waste. He thought that they were a scourge and were supposed to punish Christians for being bad, but that's supposed to happen because that's God's will.
Oh, so that's almost even worse. He's not even like accepting them as human beings that are a problem.
He doesn't really see them as
They're just like,
yeah, the Jews, he's like, if we give them sharp mercy, we might be able to save them from the fires. But the Turks, they're a lost cause. Those aren't people; they're animals. And they're trying to murder us.
I mean, both are bad, but one almost seems worse, frankly.
Right. It's like, which is bad? Like, and which is more bad? It's kind of that. Well, they're both bad. So it's really evil's evil. Like that's really horrible. So he also said that it was good to have the Quran be read so you could rip it apart. He's a big believer in that. So really, he's big on this divisiveness. What ends up happening though is because as he starts to spread his beliefs, other people take their own interpretations of it and they start to craft their own church built around it, and it causes this massive wedge in the Holy Roman Empire that eventually leads to these factions of the empire or the emperor and his pro-Catholic lords who support the church, and then the minority of lords who support Lutheranism, and they want their religious freedom. They believe that they should be able to practice their Protestant faith, which is not the term they use, Protestant. That's the term that the church applies to them. That they should be able to practice their faith. And it causes a bunch of balances and arguments and minor rebellions and violence where the emperor is trying to maintain control because he's the bodyguard of the church. He's the Holy Roman Emperor, right? So he's supposed to protect the papacy. That's his job. So for his own nobles to be the seat of this is the most solid and largest rebellion against the church amongst Christians since like the East-West Schism, when Greek Orthodox became their own thing. So he's like, I don't want to be responsible for this. And it ends up leading to the 30 Years' War, because on top of all of the issues that the Germans already have, where they have issues over land and inheritance, extreme poverty, food problems, trade problems, global issues, they're not really catching up with the rest of the world. They're too set in their ways and they're not growing fast enough. There's also this huge religious division, which is used as an excuse for people to hit each other in the face with swords, largely. It's not necessarily because of the religion, but it is used as an excuse. Right. So this causes the 30 Years' War in the end, and another series of wars throughout time where it's Protestants versus Catholics. And also Luther preached violence against Catholics. So it turned from maybe we shouldn't have indulgences to anybody who doesn't think like this should die. It's a little extreme.
Yeah. No. Okay. You've changed my mind about Luther. I don't know if I care for this fella.
Yeah, it's like when you start out and you have good ideas, but then I mean maybe he got crazy as he got older.
Yeah. Or I mean the more that he is proven right and like, you know, allowed to live and allowed to keep doing things like, I'm pretty smart.
It emboldens him. It's kind of that concept of, especially like nowadays, you see this where people aren't punished for saying or doing something horrible.
Yeah.
So that becomes the new normal.
Yeah.
So he gets his ideas of this is acceptable, and if that's acceptable, what about this? What about this? And he just incrementally seems to get. It's like, was he more extreme as he got older, or was he always that extreme and just never had to talk about it?
Right.
He trying to fight for the basics.
Well, I feel like this is not the last we will hear of Martin Luther, and I would like to learn more about him as the years go by. Yeah. But right now, we're out of time.
We're out of time. Sorry. Yeah. That's the excommunication of Martin Luther and what led to it, who the guy was, and what happened directly or indirectly as a result, plus some nuggets about some not so shiny moments of his
Well,
person.
as usual, I've learned more than I thought I would. I was surprised though, a lot less death than I thought.
Yep, I left out all the death. I think there was one guy we mentioned got burned at the stake, but that was 150 years before.
We'll leave it at I'm assuming next week won't have much death either. Next week well, we'll see. We're discussing Queen Elizabeth being crowned on January 15th, 1559.
Yes, Elizabeth the First.
Elizabeth
The
the
current one is the second. She's not the same person, although she's very old.
Wait, say that again.
Elizabeth the First, not Elizabeth the Second. That's the current one, and she's not that old. It's not the same.
She's
one.
not that old. Yes, I was going to say the numbers don't seem.
No, she's old, but she's not that old.
Well, we have plenty to discuss with that. I'm sure I'm excited for that as well.
Yep.
And if you like this video, of course, like and subscribe, share it with other people.
Share those people, tell the world.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I sure did. All right. I'm going to say goodbye. Ready for it?